So thanks everyone for coming. This is a webinar on monitoring and evaluation for student support. I'm Sophie Litschwartz, and I'm a research associate at MDRC. This webinar is part of the Student Success Acceleration Program, where, as you probably know, 59 higher education institutions received grants for programs to improve student success. Um, NDRC is serving as an independent evaluator of these grants. And so we're running a series of webinars designed to help you implement your SSAP program. Um, this is an evaluation webinar on evaluation and monitoring. And I'm going to email the slides after the presentation, and this is also going to be recorded. So in this webinar, what we're going to teach you is how to determine whether your program is working. In doing that, I'm going to cover what makes a good outcome. What are different potential data sources and how to use them to construct an outcome? What is a causal claim and why we want to make them? And how to use comparison groups to estimate the program impact. But before I get into any of that, I just want to talk about what is the purpose of evaluation and monitoring. So let's say I have a math resource center. And the math center is staffed with tutors from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. during the week. Students drop in with their math questions, and then the math tutors mostly spend their time helping students with questions from math homework assignments. So, what I want to happen, ideally, is that the students who need extra support in math come to my center. Uh, Tutors work with the students on important course concepts, and the students gain a deeper understanding of their math course material. And in the end, the students do better in their math courses. But I might have this happen instead, which is students who really need support don't come. Students only come late in the course when it's really too late to help them. Or students receive a lot of rote answers to homework problems. And then the students don't do better in their math courses. Uh, or I might have this happen, which is the tutoring wastes a lot of the students' time that could be better spent doing other things. The tutors explain the concepts incorrectly. The tutors are mean, and the students get more insecure about their math skills. And so then the students do worse in their math courses. And I really want to know which of these things it is, because I'm going to want to grow a successful program. I'm going to want to promote the program to more students. I want to secure buy-in from internal and external partners. I want to make the case for more money for my program. In grant applications and in budgetary meetings. I want to make sure the program doesn't get cut. And I want to develop other similar programs. Um, and if my program is unsuccessful, I really want to figure out why it isn't working and make the program better. Or sometimes it's just going to make sense to cut the program and reallocate it to resources to things that are working. Or if my thing is hurting students, I really want to stop doing that. Um, So before we get into the, I'd like everyone just to take a moment and think about your specific program and think about sort of an aspect that you might want to evaluate. And if people want, they should share about the programs in the chat. Okay. So, uh, oh, um, so here's the first part, which is what makes a good outcome. Now we're going to talk about outcomes. Uh, So this is sort of a logic model of how I want my center to work. I have my math resource center. Uh, Tutors help students who need extra support in their math courses. And then students do better in their math. This last thing, that's my outcome. It's how I'm going to define success. So there are many ways to measure how well students do in their math course. We can look at the percentage of students who pass. We can look at the average math course grade. We can look at the percentage of students who enroll in future math courses. We could look at the percentage of students who pass future math courses. We could look at average college retention. And when we think about these, each measure has its own pros and cons. So if we think of average math course grade, um, so some good parts about it, it's going to capture math competency for the whole range of student abilities that everyone gets a grade, and I can see improvements uh, with every grade. And, if we look at research, it's correlated with college persistence and success. On the other hand, often when I look at grades, I don't get to see students who withdraw, or it can often be difficult to compare across courses. Um, or so I could also look at the percentage of students who pass their math course. Um, and this is good because it captures a substantively important outcome. It's more comparable across courses. Uh, but I'm going to have this problem where it's going to be only relevant for the students on the pass fail margin. And then also, to the extent it's relevant for those students, it's only going to show me sort of improvements I did just to get students from passing to failing. But if they learn more, I'm not going to see that when I do my evaluation. And so the way I sort of figure out my outcomes is it's really I need a specific goal to figure out my specific outcome. So students do better in their math course is just a very general goal. And it's a little too general to figure out what my program's actually doing. One of these is sort of which students do better in their math course. So I'm gonna think about my center and what my purpose of it was when setting it up. And really, I wanted to, and the goals was to help struggling students. So that's really the students I'm focused on. And here, better really is the goal of the center really was to get more students to pass their courses. So it's to help struggling students pass their courses. And so that's what better is going to mean for me here. And I think the thing you have to understand is like there's no generic right outcome. What it is different programs and policies are going to mean that I want to use different outcomes. So here we have our Math Resource Center, and I'm going to say that the goal was to help struggling students pass their courses. And so the outcome I really want to look at is the percentage of students that pass. Or I might have an outreach program to promote Math Resource Center usage. So I want to increase the number of struggling students who seek help at the Math Center. And there I want to say is my outcome is percentage of students identified as at risk who come to the center. Or I might have a pre-college program to promote math self-efficacy. Uh, and there I want to improve students' confidence in their ability to complete the math coursework. And so there I might use an outcome is an average score on the math self-efficacy scale. Another thing is that proximal goals are going to be are going to lead to better outcomes. So let's say I have a peer mentorship program for first generation students. I would like the peer mentors are going to help incoming freshmen navigate college, with the idea that first generation students feel a greater sense of belonging, with the final goal of improved retention for first generation students. This is an outcome here, the improved retention, the thing I finally want, but it's going to be really hard for me to notice that sort of for my specific goal. And it's going to be much easier for me to measure sort of their sense of belonging and to be able to pick that up when I create a measurement. So I'm much better off instead of looking at retention, looking at like a survey measure of student belonging. So I would like everyone to take a second and think about the program you're working with, what you're evaluating, and just sort of think what is the specific goal of that program and what outcomes might you use to measure success in achieving that goal. And I'd also be interested if anybody has any questions, take any questions anybody has at this point. Yeah, the first thing, what makes a good outcome? Uh, yep. And so the second we're going to go over is what are different potential data sources and how to use them to construct an outcome. So here, which is sort of where do outcomes come from? Some information generally already exists in administrative data systems. So administrative data is going to be data collected in the normal course of running your institution. Um, if you don't know where this data is, it's usually available. And if you ask around, either at the Office of Assessment or Institutional Resource, they might be able to point you to how to get this data. And this data usually contains things like student college performance, so that's students' courses taken, grades, that sort of thing. It might also contain student survey information, depending on what's being collected at your university, or it might be demographic and student. You might have demographic and student background information. So that's things like Pell eligibility, race, gender, high school GPA, that sort of thing. Um, Other times you're going to want to collect outcome. You're going to want to look at outcomes that are not already collected. So that might be program participation information, something like how many students come to the Math Resource Center, or participation in other services. So if I have a program to connect students to wraparound services, I really might want to know how many students are going to utilize those services. Or the other thing that people often collect is survey measures. So if I have a program to make the college community more culturally responsive, I might want a survey to ask how students how culturally inclusive they think the environment is. Uh, Finally, sometimes you want to collect something even more complicated than those things. So there's a set of often sort of specialized psychological measures. That's things like mindfulness skills or math self-efficacy or students' sense of well-being. Uh, or you might want to collect academic assessments. So a test on algebra skills or a grammar test, that sort of thing. So let's say I have a math summer bridge program. My summer bridge program is focused on foundational math skills. I have a 6 weeks of summer math instruction, and I would like the students to master the math skills needed to succeed in college level math coursework. So, um, the summer bridge program teaches a sort of specific set of math skills, and I want to know how they do on those skills. So, ideally, I would test them at the end of the program to figure out how they're doing on the skills. Um, but I don't have access to that for my evaluation, maybe because it's too expensive to collect specific data, or I'm evaluating it after the program is over and no one ever collected the data, or the data was collected, as part of the instruction they gave assessments, but no one ever collected the data, or it's in a system I don't have access to. So if I think about my program, sometimes I'm not going to always be able to use the outcome I most want, but I can think sort of more broadly. So students are master. The reason I want the students to master the skills needed to succeed in college level coursework is because I eventually would like them to pass that coursework, and I might have more access to that data. So uh, I want everyone to take a second and think again um, about the data you have access to. And think about, is it feasible to evaluate your program using the outcome you were thinking of, or sort of what other outcomes might be available that you could use to evaluate your program. And also, I do not have exactly an hour's worth of material here. And so it would be nice if people had questions. I'd love to take them even not in chat, and or we could talk about stuff people are working on before we get into the next part of the presentation.
We're going to use our institutional research and assessment department to pull our numbers for our current enrollments, any stop outs we had, or they didn't complete the onboarding process, where they stopped. Was it Apply Texas? Was it the holds? Where was it payments? Where was it? So we can use our system to help guide people to complete the process and stay enrolled all the way through completion to get, earn their degree or transfer, whichever they prefer. But that's how we're going to use our resources here.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. Yes, exactly. And like looking right, you can look. There's a lot of different outcomes there and stuff to look at. At each point in the process and see how your system is working. Um, that's great. Thank you. All right. So here's our sort of guide map. We looked at what makes a good outcome. We talked about what are different potential data sources and how can people use them to construct an outcome. And now we're going to talk about causal claims and why we want to make them. So, uh, and the broader talk is sort of comparison groups. So here I've got my tutoring center, and I have here my bar chart, which shows that 80% of students who went to tutoring passed their math course. Um, but I don't know what to do with that. I don't know if that's a lot or a little. I don't know if my tutoring helped or not because I don't know how to think about that in comparison to anything else. Um, and in fact, if I sort of look at my logic model here, all these little arrows, those are causal claims, as in I think I'm making something happen. So I'm thinking that the tutors are going to help the students, and that's going to make them do better in a math course. And comparisons groups are really how we evaluate causal claims. Does the tutoring cause students to be more likely to pass their math course? Well, I have in my data what percentage of students who went to tutoring passed their math course, but I need to figure out what would have happened, or at least I need some guess of what would have happened without tutoring. And so I need to compare my data to something. So here's my 80% of students who went to tutoring passing. Uh, and here's 95% of students who did not go to tutoring passing. And so it looks like just from this that the tutoring made it worse, that the students who aren't going to tutoring are doing better than the students who went to tutoring. Um, and that would be bad, except for sort of fundamentally the issue is that students who didn't get tutoring aren't really a good comparison group for the students who did. If we look here, we see that the students who went to tutoring came in with a high school GPA of 2.0, of an average high school GPA of 2.0, whereas the students who didn't go to tutoring came in with an average GPA of 3.0, which just means that the students who aren't going to tutoring were just a lot more prepared. And so it isn't necessarily that my tutoring is making the students do worse, but that they're not comparable groups. Um, and so that's going to lead us, I want to talk a little bit about causality and the potential outcomes framework. Uh, so I have two students. This is Morris. Uh, Morris goes to the Math Resource Center and gets help with his with his algebra course. And this is Elijah. And Elijah's taking the same algebra course, but doesn't go to the Math Resource Center and get any help. And here's what we observe. So here's Morris getting tutoring and he gets a C. And here's Elijah. Elijah doesn't get any tutoring and Elijah gets a B. But we can imagine another world, in the parlance of comics, like an Earth 2, where it's the opposite, where Elijah goes to tutoring and gets an A, and Morris doesn't go to tutoring and fails the course. Uh, and we can think of the effect of tutoring as sort of the difference between these two states of reality. So here's Morris, who we observe in reality, going to tutoring, getting a C. And the effect of tutoring for Morris is the difference between those two. And so that's the difference between a C and an F is the effect of tutoring for Morris. And similarly, Elijah, we can compare what happens in the world we observe, where Elijah doesn't go to tutoring, to the other world where he gets an A. And the effect of tutoring for Elijah would have been it's 1 grade. It's between a B and an A. But we have a problem, which is you cannot go to tutoring and not go to tutoring at the same time. Um, and so, one way people often talk about causal inference or trying to figure out the effects of things is a sort of missing data problem, where we want to figure out what happens in the worlds we don't observe. And so, we try to construct comparison groups that approximate these worlds as best we can. But an important thing is like observing the outcomes we observe for Elijah isn't going to be a good way of determining Morris's outcomes without tutoring because these are different students. Um, and in general, program participants are pretty different from non-participants. So either and one way to think about it is our programs are often targeted to students we think need the most help. And so their sort of outcomes without extra support are just going to be worse than the students who aren't participating. Or alternatively, we students who are able to or who end up participating in programs, uh, we sort of expect their outcomes sometimes to be better, either because they're sort of at better support systems or more motivation. That is the reason that they end up in participating with programs in the first place. So I'm going to do our last bit, which is how to use comparison groups to estimate program impacts. So I'm going to just spend a little slides doing sort of a pitch for randomization, which is really going to create the most reliable comparison groups. We can flip a coin and randomly provide tutoring to some students and not to others. And because we just randomly assigned it, the differences between the two groups are just going to be sort of random differences. There isn't going to be any systematic differences. And so we can just evaluate our tutoring by comparing the outcomes for students who get tutoring to the ones who don't. Um, and this is why MDRC does a lot of randomized studies. But I want to acknowledge that randomization can be impractical. Um, for one, I have my math resource center, uh, and I want to make sure it's available to anybody who's interested. Or I have my summer bridge program where I targeted it to incoming students who we thought needed extra support. And I want to make sure it's available to anybody I targeted. Or I already did my program and I'm going to evaluate it after the fact. So let's say I had an outreach program that was done last year to encourage students to seek tutoring. Um, that's done. I can't randomize, but I still would like to be able to evaluate. Uh, but so those are sort of the reasons people give where randomization can be impractical. But I think it's sometimes more practical than people think. Um, Many programs often have more students who want to do them than there are available slots. And so we're going to need to find a way to figure out how to allocate those resources. Lottery is often just the fairest way to allocate scarce slots. I think sometimes we think we are better at targeting supports than we really are. Uh, Wait lists and things like first come, first serve can really be biased towards students who are either able to show up first or can wait on a wait list and don't need whatever we're offering right now. Um, and program referrals can be dependent on the biases of the kind of people who are referring them. Also, if I have some sort of new experimental program where I don't have a lot of evidence for whether it's going to work or not, um, that's good. It's good to try new things. Um, but if I don't really know whether it's going to work, uh, things can make students off, even if we don't anticipate that. And so we really want to know, rather certainly whether the thing is working. Um, so randomization gives us the best information on whether something worked. All right, but that's sort of the randomization pitch. But really, what I want to cover is sort of three ways you can create comparison groups without randomization. One is matching. One is just sort of doing a pre versus post analysis. And one is called difference in difference. So the way matching works is I'm going to use baseline data to make a comparison group. So, baseline data is anything that's going to be about the student from before the intervention. So here I want to use high school GPA because it's predictive of the outcome. And for each student who received tutoring, I'm going to find a student who didn't receive tutoring with the same high school GPA. And so now I'm going to have two groups which had the same average high school GPA because I constructed one of them. And now I'm going to compare the outcomes of each group. So here's I start by making this my bar chart of my matched group. So I have students who went to tutoring at least once, have an average GPA of 2.0, and then I have this matched group of no tutoring, which is a group I constructed of students who didn't go to tutoring but had the same high school GPA as the students who did. And we had this comparison graph of just students who did and didn't, and it seemed to show that the tutoring made students worse. But if I look at my match group instead, I see this small difference, which is that tutoring seems to have increased the pass rate by 5 percentage points. So that's one way to do it. I can do matching. Another thing people do is a sort of pre versus post analysis, where what's going to happen is that each student serves as their own comparison group. So I look at the value of my outcome before the program takes place. Here we're going to look at the average student scores on some foundational math skills tests before our summer bridge program. Then we're going to look at how the students do on the same outcome after the program. We're going to give them the same test, and we're just going to compare the two values. So before the summer ridge, the average score was 60. After the summer ridge, the average score was 80. Um, and there it looks like the summer bridge program increased students' scores by about 20 points. Uh, difference is sort of a more complicated version of this. So if we don't think a single comparison will work for a variety of reasons, one, if remember earlier, it doesn't always make sense to collect pre-programmed data on the outcome. For one, outcomes don't always have a meaningful pre-programmed value. So if I'm looking at retention or passing a course or any number of things, it's not always meaningful to talk about something before I do my program. Or sometimes the data just isn't available. I can't collect specialized data from my program for a variety of reasons. Um, or we might be concerned that the value on our outcome will just go up over time regardless of our program. So if we think about tutoring, the students are taking a math course. I expect the students to be better at math after the course, regardless of whether they go to tutoring. So if I just look at the difference across tutoring, I don't know if that's the effect of tutoring or the effect of the course. And so here, what we're going to do is we're going to compare two trends over time. So we're going to look at a trend in the outcome for the treated group. We can either look at our actual students that we were part of the program, or we can look at the sort of population that would be eligible, similar students over time. And then we're going to compare the treated group trend in the outcome to the non-treated group. Unlike the match comparison, the treated and the non-treated group don't need to be the same. They just need to have the same trajectory. I just have to think that sort of over time, the same change is happening to both groups. So let's say I have my students eligible for my summer bridge program, and I look at the pass rate of their first year, their first college math course after the program was implemented. And so in the fall before summer bridge is implemented, they had a 65% pass rate. In the fall after, it's an 85% pass rate. But at the same time, if I look for students not eligible for summer bridge, so the student not they would have increased their pass rates increased 5%. And so the way I'm going to calculate the effect of summer bridge is the difference between these two trends. So I'm going to take 20, I'm going to take 5, and I'm just going to take the difference. I'm going to say the effect of the program was 15 percentage points. So we sort of put all the things together. The way to think about it is you want to think about the program you're evaluating. You want to think about what the goal is. You want to think about what data you have and you collect. And then you use that to think about what your outcome you would use. And then you think about comparison groups. So in this webinar, what we've learned is what makes a good outcome, uh, what are different potential data sources and how to use them to construct an outcome, what is a causal claim and why we want to make them, and how to use comparison groups to estimate the program impact. Finally, I want to say this is evaluations often can be big, elaborate, multi-million-dollar productions. MDRC does a lot of those, but they don't need to be. You can evaluate your program with the resources you have and the time you're already spending doing things like grant applications or annual reports, right? You guys all wrote a grant to be part of this program, so like it's sort of part of that work. Also, and part of this, I'm going to send out these slides, which I'm going to have it linked to institutional resources. Though, again, your assessment and IR staff are good people to go to, or often if you're working on something, there might be campus faculty who are studying the same kind of issues you're working with. But here's the National College Attainment Network Common Measures Handbook. So this is a handbook of commonly used measures to evaluate college programs and policies. And they're broken down by sort of the types, like subcategories of, college preparedness, persistence. And for each outcome measure, they explain sort of how prevalent it is and what's the research basis for using these as an outcome-based measure. The What Works Clearinghouse, if you're ever trying to do a slightly more elaborate evaluation or you're looking at more elaborate outcomes, uh, has sort of complicated but useful sort of explanations of what you want to look for, both in your outcome measures and your evaluation methods. And then here's some sort of link to some videos on causal inference topics that are trying to be an intro to the topic. Um, and that
Did you mute or did my thing? I can't hear you.
Just do that.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah,
I
there
can
you
hear
go.
you now.
Thanks. Yeah, I can hear you. Thanks. Sorry.
I don't have any questions. Thank you for the presentation. And I look forward to linking to those resources that you just showed when you share the slides.
Great.
No questions on my end either. Thank you, though.
Yeah. I appreciate you guys taking your summer afternoon to to be with me. All right. If that's it, then thank you so much.
Thank you, Sophie. Have a great day today.
You too.
Thank you.